reigniting the Jaguar brand after a long period of stagnation under the ownership of British Leyland. In the early 1990s, the company proved to the world that it still had the ability to create dedicated sports cars with the XJ220, a road-going leviathan which stole the record for world's fastest production car upon its launch in 1992, but was crippled in terms of sales prospects by forces both within and outside the Jaguar firm, culminating in a rare breed of supercar that is now a sought-after classic. The story of the XJ220 begins in 1981, when, at the encouragement of racing team owner Tom Wilkinshaw, Jaguar entered their then flagship model, the XJS Grand Tourer, into that year's European Touring Car Championship, this partnership resulting in a win for both Jaguar and Wilkinshaw's own racing team, Tom Wilkinshaw Racing, or TWR, in 1983, and cemented the company's place as a major provider for factory support. The Jaguar-engined XJR5, partaking in the IMSA GT Championship and the FIA Group C World Sports Car Championship that resulted in WSC Group C wins for 1987, 1988 and 1991, while the XJR9 scored overall triumphs at the 1988 24 Hours of Le Mans and the 24 Hours of Daytona, followed by the Jaguar XJR12's double victory for the 1990 rendition of the famed 24-hour endurance races. Jaguar's success on the racetrack, though, wasn't reflected in the same magnitude by their road cars, as having suffered financially during their ownership by the nationalised car-building giant British Leyland throughout the 1970s, the firm was living on a hand-to-mouth existence when it came to income, their corporate focus being placed squarely on a more luxurious market rather than a dedicated mixture of both affluent motoring and road-going sports prowess, as per the likes of Porsche and Maserati. Entering the 1980s, Jaguar's passenger car efforts had been supported almost entirely by the XJS Grand Tourer, which, while a largely unsuccessful machine following its 1975 launch and faced discontinuation on a number of occasions, was given a sales resurgence after a major overhaul in the first half of the decade, before becoming a sales hit in 1988 with the provision of a dedicated convertible, although the income garnered by the XJS was largely lost maintaining the company's other models, most notably the XJ40 luxury saloon, which often topped consumer surveys as among the most unreliable premium cars on sale at the time, and thus garnered a slew of warranty claims that was bleeding the company dry. Nevertheless, Jaguar continued down the road of luxury motoring with a sporting edge, but none of their models held the same reputation for excitement and style as the preceding generation of Jaguar cars from the 1950s and 60s, namely the legendary E-Type, S-Type and Mark X, and despite the efforts of third-party constructors such as Lynx, Lister and Koenig, who attempted to spice up the range with spoiler packs and shooting brake conversions, it was apparent that the Jaguar company had sailed firmly into the same market bracket as the likes of Rolls-Royce when it came to opulent Grand Tourers and saloons, losing much of the performance that had helped cement its place at the top of the motoring hierarchy. Noting the loss of this prestige, Jaguar's chief engineer, Professor Jim Randall, proposed marrying the championship-winning engineering of its race cars with the luxury accomplishments of its road cars, and started work on a road-going supercar that would be designed for FIA Group B use, starting development of the project in late 1987 with the unveiling of a cardboard model which depicted a futuristic yet highly evocative supercar, followed by the creation of what was known as the Saturday Club, a group of 12 volunteer Jaguar engineers and designers who would help to bring Randall's idea to life while working outside their normal hours within the company, who had not officially approved the construction of this new car, with Randall himself using his own substantial reputation within the motoring world as a means to reach agreements with parts builders to donate necessary components, in exchange for guaranteeing their place as a supplier for the main project when and if it was given the go-ahead by the Jaguar management. Working evenings and weekends for 10 months straight, the concept car, assembled on essentially no budget, was presented at the 1988 British International Motor Show in Birmingham, its rounded looks and low, long body being an incredible leap forward in terms of styling convention, a vivid and exciting departure from the angles of its closest rival, the Ferrari F40. The car, christened the XJ220, as a nod to the company's 120-mile-an-hour Jaguar XK120 of the 1940s, which itself was once the fastest production car in the world, illustrating an aesthetic which seemed to be at least a decade ahead of its time. However, while the XK120, as per its name, was expected to and succeeded in reaching over 120 miles an hour in 1949, the XJ220, in order to match its own desired top speed of 220 miles an hour, had a monumental task before it, with designers needing to develop a sports car which met the stringent non-rally regulations of FIA Group B racing, but having no backing by the wider Jaguar firm in order to assemble a full-size mock-up, the development team being entirely reliant on the original cardboard prop put together by Randall in 1987, while all aerodynamic tests had to be conducted on a 1/4 scale model. For power, the XJ220 adopted the controversial Jaguar 6.2-litre V12 engine that had originally made its debut in 1971 with the E-Type Series 3, before being placed into the XJS as one of its more contentious aspects during the post-oil crisis era, the power plant for the XJ220 being tweaked by Cosworth to create a 700 horsepower race-ready unit that immediately caught the interest of hundreds of super-rich clients. The prospect of a V12 supercar, as opposed to the twin-turbo V8 from the Ferrari F40 and the twin-turbocharged flat 6 from the Porsche 959, meaning buyers were willing to put down a deposit of £50,000 for an XJ220, or £142,600 in 2022, while the overall asking price of the car was set at £290,000, or £827,000 in 2022. With a proposed production run of 350 cars, the main Jaguar company, which was facing bankruptcy and a takeover by Ford following a series of financial blunders during the late 1980s, had not the resources to develop the XJ220 in-house, and therefore turned to Tom Wilkinshaw and his racing team to help bring the production model to fruition, the concept promising 4-channel anti-lock braking, an advanced all-wheel drive system developed in conjunction with FF development, adaptive suspension, and 4-wheel steering, all of which would be kept inside the same futuristic rounded body which had wooed audiences at the 1988 Birmingham Motor Show. Although the demand was to maintain the car's imposing 2-seater low-slung silhouette, the 4000 series aluminium panels needed to construct the bodywork had to be hammer-beaten into shape by hand, a lengthy process in itself when considering the car's comparatively large dimensions, while under the generally unchanged skin, Jaguar was forced to abandon many of its more complicated mechanical proposals, including the weighty active aerodynamic spoiler, which was changed to a long tail end with a lighter fixed wing, while to save money, the tail lights were sourced from the humble Rover 200 family saloon. Against the V12-powered rear-wheel steering all-wheel drive concept, the resulting production XJ220 instead hosted a Jaguar TWR 3.5-litre twin-turbocharged V6, mated to a 5-speed transmission developed by FF Development. This power unit having been derived from the same V6 unit placed into the MG Metro 6R4 Group B rally car of 1984 and delivered 542 horsepower, a shadow when compared to the 700 horsepower present in the Cosworth-tuned V12 concept, while the 4-wheel drive was dropped in favour of a more conventional rear-wheel drive configuration, shedding more weight but stripping the car of its exceptional driving capabilities, and the rear-wheel steering was also abandoned for weight-saving purposes, replaced by traditional all-wheel independent suspension with double wishbones, inboard coils with gas dampers, and inboard roll bars. In keeping with Jaguar's desire to make the XJ220 a perfect mixture of sporting prowess and luxury accomplishments, the car was fitted with various driver aids in order to give it a feel which wasn't as race-orientated as the rally-based Porsche 959 or the stripped-down Ferrari F40, the car being fitted with power-assisted rack and pinion steering and ventilated cross-drilled disc brakes, although these were, controversially, not fitted with either a servo or an anti-lock braking system, as a concession for seasoned drivers, with many owners desiring a car with a touch more livability being forced to purchase an aftermarket ABS system. Eventually, the Jaguar XJ220 was ready to enter sales for 1992, the great expectations of the car highlighted in that TWR was renamed to Jaguar Sport Limited, and a dedicated factory was constructed at Wickham Mill near Banbury in order to assemble the XJ220, while also being the main production facility for Aston Martin, which itself had been purchased by Ford alongside Jaguar during the late 1980s, the Wickham Mill plant being opened by Diana, Princess of Wales, during a special ceremony, followed by the first production car being unveiled at that year's Tokyo Motor Show. Externally, the car continued to sport the same winning looks as the 1988 concept, and was an imposingly streamlined machine that stood out firmly against its competitors, but for those customers promised a V12 all-wheel drive supercar, what they were presented with was a comparatively humdrum machine mechanically, its problems beneath the body being exacerbated by its sheer size, which made it prone to significant understeer and oversteer on corners, and a difficult car to maneuver on the tight streets of towns and cities, especially in Europe, although in a straight line the XJ220 truly lived up to its name, with a test by Martin Brundle attaining a top speed of 212 miles an hour, and later 217 miles an hour with unrestricted catalyzers at the Nardo test track, a mite short of the desired 220 miles an hour in the car's name, but by far and away the fastest production car in the world. Regardless of its achievements, though, the XJ220's launch couldn't have been timed worse, as in the wake of the 1991 Gulf War, the global economy was in the midst of a terrible recession, and with the price of living having skyrocketed since the original orders were placed in 1988, many buyers were unwilling to maintain their £50,000 deposits, especially since the overall asking price for the car had jumped to £470,000 or £1 million in 2022, owners attempting to void their contracts with Jaguar by stating that the car they'd been promised originally when they laid down their deposits in 1988 was not the one presented to them in 1992, the V12 all-wheel drive transmission having been replaced by a twin-turbo V6 and a conventional rear-wheel drive layout, resulting in Jaguar taking its customers to court for attempting to break the terms of their contract, and eventually forcing them to purchase a car they no longer wanted. This isn't to imply that the XJ220 wasn't loved in spite of its many altered features, the motoring press adoring the machine for its incredible performance, styling and ergonomics that weren't too restrictive for a car of its class, although one major bugbear of the model was its tremendous dimensions, which, combined with the unassisted brakes and unoptimized gearbox, made it impossible to drive in regular stop-start traffic or on the narrow streets of traditional European cities. Sadly, glowing press reviews did nothing to help the car meet its proposed sales output of 350 units, and by the time the car ended production in 1994, with 282 examples built, its record as the fastest production car in the world had been beaten by the McLaren F1, which, with its 618 horsepower 6.1-litre BMW V12 from the 8 Series Grand Tourer, delivered the promises Jaguar was unable to fulfill, attaining a top speed of 221 miles an hour in the production car and later 242 miles an hour with the modified XP5 prototype in 1998, affluent buyers who had abandoned the XJ220 flocking to the $1 million F1 in their droves. With the McLaren F1 having stolen the record for fastest production car, the XJ220, following the initial burst of enthusiasm immediately after its launch, quickly fell into obscurity, 22 left-hand drive examples of the car going unsold until 1998, when they were essentially given away by Jaguar for less than half their original asking price, or around £150,000, the Jaguar firm, at the behest of its Ford owners, trying and failing to recoup their losses of the XJ220 project by way of creating cheap and easy-to-build premium saloons based on the underpinnings of regular Ford cars such as the Mondeo, resulting in the revived S-Type of 1999 and the X-Type of 2001, both of which, in a manner similar to the likes of the Cadillac Cimarron of the 1980s, lacked the prestige and exclusivity expected of a Jaguar model, and thus failed to sell in the numbers desired, continuing to be a drain on Ford's profit margin until Jaguar was sold off to Tata Steel alongside Land Rover in 2008. In 2010, Jaguar attempted to revive the XJ220's philosophy by way of a hybrid electric successor, the CX-75, a concept car that, with a mixture of a twin-charged inline-4 engine and 4 Yasa electric traction motors producing a combined 778 horsepower, would become the company's flagship supercar with a top speed of 200 miles an hour. The car, despite the production of 5 developmental prototypes, ultimately failing to reach mass assembly due to the continuing effects of the 2008 global economic recession, although a mechanically unrelated but visually similar version did make an appearance in the 2015 James Bond movie Spectre during a hectic car chase through the streets of Rome. Nevertheless, while Jaguar has yet to provide the XJ220 with a true heir, the years of obscurity this car languished in have now been replaced by a brand new appreciation for what the model achieved, the car transcending its many mechanical compromises and the controversies that followed to become a legend of the supercar scene, its long, low and rounded profile still striking a chord with enthusiasts even to this day, and is undeniably a rare breed to be found out and about regularly on the world's highways and byways, the car now praised as perhaps the last true Jaguar to be built and the very pinnacle of their engineering capabilities.